Wells' family not turn over his cell phone to the police? The lawyer for one of Nolan's friends just made that accusation on Dan Abrams' Sirius show, and we're going to bring on Dan to give his take on that and the latest on this case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
He was 18 years old, a college football player with his whole life still stretched out in front of him, and on the 4th of July, he climbed out of a boat headed for a barrier island off the coast of Mississippi called Horn Island.
What a statement on the Nolan Wells case, right? Did Nolan Wells' family not turn over his phone to authorities? Now, I got to explain where this allegation is coming from because it just happened on Dan Abrams' Sirius show, and we're going to bring Dan on. But Nolan Wells, of course, is the 18-year-old college football player who died after a July 4th boating trip to this barrier island known as Horn Island out in Mississippi.
2 days later, on July 6th, his body was found. His name was Nolan Wells, and right now, nobody, not his family, not the sheriff's department, not the internet that has spent weeks dissecting his final hours, actually knows how he died.
Mississippi. His body was found on July 6th. His family is demanding answers. They are demanding a thorough and complete investigation. They have hired their own attorney, Ben Crump, to conduct an independent investigation as authorities, namely the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, conduct their own investigation. The results of the state official autopsy toxicology report, they have not been released. The case is expected to go to a grand jury under Mississippi law for potential criminal charges. Only after that could we expect to see the autopsy report, the toxicology report. But look, we don't even know for sure how Nolan died. We don't know the circumstances of his death. We don't know.
But this week, a lawyer sat down on a national radio show and said something that changed the entire conversation. He looked into the camera, essentially, and said he was willing to bet his own reputation that Nolan's family has not turned over his cell phone to investigators. Sit with that for a second. In a case already drowning in suspicion, someone just accused the victim's own family of obstructing the search for answers. Let's back up, because to understand why that accusation landed like a grenade, you need to understand what's already been simmering underneath this case. Nolan's mother, Christine, has said she does not trust the official story. She and the family brought an attorney, Ben Crump, a name true crime audiences know well, to run an independent investigation alongside the one being conducted by the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. That's already two competing investigations, each with its own incentives, each potentially reaching different conclusions. The state autopsy and toxicology results haven't been released. Under Mississippi law, that likely won't happen until this goes in front of a grand jury. Which means, right now, in the middle of all this noise, we don't actually know if Nolan drowned by accident, if something happened to him on that island, or if a crime was committed at all. That uncertainty is exactly the vacuum conspiracy theories love to fill. Here's where it gets messier. The friends who were reportedly with Nolan that day, Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, and Morgan Seymour, have
lawyered up. In light of what
I'm
about to play you from SiriusXM, which is shocking, if true, we reported the other day that Nolan's friends, who apparently were with him that day, have hired lawyers. So we're talking about Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, Morgan Seymour, and that according to TMZ, Hudson and Patalo took their lawyers, Tyler Cox and Edward Andrew Paltzik, back to Horn Island. So it seems they may be conducting their own independent investigation. And this seems to be in light of reported threats that they've been receiving. There's been kind of the rumblings they may file their own kind of defamation actions against people who have been spreading what they claim is misinformation about them online. So they go to this island, maybe get a better understanding of the island's layout, the dynamics. And to be clear, when I talk about potential litigation, there has been online speculation that
not just lawyered up, but gone on the offensive. Reports surfaced that Hudson and Patalo brought their attorneys back to Horn Island, apparently to walk the terrain themselves, to understand the rip currents, the layout.
Position is.
What I also find interesting is this is now a third investigation that's happening. So you have local law enforcement investigating at the sheriff's office. You have the family, Nolan Wells' family, conducting their own investigation. And then you spoke with the attorneys that are representing Nolan's friends who are conducting seemingly their own investigation, going to the island. What did they tell you about that and about what their goal is right now?
Yeah, I mean, they basically were saying that they're not really trying to investigate this the same way the authorities are trying to investigate it. You know, from their perspective is their clients don't know what happened to him after the last time they saw him that afternoon, right? So their position is we wanted to go to Horn Island to make sure that, in particular, their new lawyer understood the landscape, just had a sense of what it's like there, so that when he's talking about this, and again, potentially filing defamation lawsuits in connection with it, that he had a good handle on exactly sort of how the island works. And I say that because, Yeah, this isn't a typical island where there's like facilities and stuff. It's just like people go there, they go boating there, they bring their boats there, and then they leave, right? And so, they wanted to look at, where the rip currents could be and just, as they said, not to draw conclusions, but just so, they can be educated. In particular,
the reality of a place with no lifeguards, no facilities, just boats coming and going. Why would they do that? According to their team, it's because they've been receiving threats. Online, they've effectively been placed on trial by a public that has decided, without a shred of confirmed evidence, that these friends know more than they're saying. One of them, Patalo, went on another show and pointed a finger back at Nolan's own mother, accusing her of fueling the frenzy by going public early and exposing their identities to a mob of strangers with opinions and no facts. And then Hudson said something that should stop you in your tracks. I wish we would have never went out.
That they were somehow involved in what happened to Nolan. To be clear, there is nothing that we have seen released by authorities to verify that in any way. They deny any allegations. Also, Seymour, Hudson, and Patalo, they appeared on the Officer Tatum show, hosted by Brandon Tatum, who's been looking into this. And Patalo allegedly blamed Nolan's mom, Christine Wonsley, for all the social media frenzy that's out there, claiming that her, quote, blasting us on social media from the get-go, that was an issue, that she was putting their identities out there. And he claims the story was, quote, blown out of proportion. They have called Nolan their brother. Hudson also said, I wish we would have never went out, meaning never went out to Horn Island. So this brings us now to Dan Abrams'
Never went out to Horn Island. Is that grief? Is that guilt? Is that just the plain human regret of someone who watched a friend die and can't undo the day? We don't know. That's the trap of this case. Almost every quote can be read two completely different ways depending on what you've already decided to believe. Now here's the part that actually broke this story wide open. Nolan's mother has claimed that when the phone was returned to the family, she tracked its location using a Life 360 app and discovered there were no photos or videos left on his Snapchat.
And that is when a caller named Mo asked about Nolan's phone. Now, let me remind everybody about this, about Nolan's phone for a second. Nolan's mom previously reportedly claimed that when the family got Nolan's phone back, seemingly from his friends, that she actually tracked the phone down using a Life 360 app, she reportedly claimed that there were no pictures or videos on these Snapchat accounts that Nolan had. So it was a concern that was information deleted. And you couple that with the report that Nolan's family had issued subpoenas to companies like Snapchat and WhatsApp and TikTok and Meta and Life 360, potentially as part of upcoming litigation. This is according to court documents that were obtained by the Sun Herald reporting.
Deleted, wiped potentially is the word being used. Combine that with the reporting, subpoenas reportedly issued to Snapchat, WhatsApp, TikTok, Meta, and Life 360 as the family builds toward possible litigation. And you have a mother who believes evidence was destroyed before she ever got her hands on that device. Crump had even said publicly that his own former law enforcement experts would work alongside police to do a joint download of the phone's contents so everyone could see the data at the exact same moment. Full transparency. That was the plan.
Reporting by the New York Post. Remember, they're also just conducting their own independent investigation as to what happened here. Now, Ben Crump had reportedly indicated at one point that his team and authorities would do a mutual inspection of Nolan's phone. And Crump had said that their own former law enforcement experts will, quote, help us with the cell phone downloads so everybody will be able to see at the same time what the cell phone has. But then this happens. Caller Mo comes on.
Then a caller named Mo phoned into a radio show hosted by Dan Abrams and asked the two attorneys representing Nolan's friends a direct question. Were there messages missing from Nolan's phone? Photos that shouldn't be there. Adults on that boat who nobody's talking about. And attorney Tyler Cox didn't hedge. He said he'd heard headlines claiming the family would grant the sheriff's office access to the phone, but he never saw it followed through. And then the line that's now spreading everywhere
comes on and asks this, and then listen to Tyler Cox's reaction.
Let's go to Mo in Houston. Mo, how you doing? What do you got?
Hey, Dan, love the show. I appreciate you gentlemen for coming on as well.
Thank you.
A couple quick things. Was Nolan Wells, were there messages missing out of his phone? And the second thing is
Absolutely
photos
not.
have come out. Yeah, they were. Yeah, they're saying that there were messages missing off of his phone. His phone was wiped. And another thing, there's pictures of, like with the modern day with people with cell phones and social media, there's pictures with adults on that boat. There, in one of the adults, they're even saying it's like an affluent crowd, judge, businessman. They were saying it's just kids, but they're adults there.
Right, but here's the thing that they're saying. I don't know who the they is, but go ahead. Tyler, you want to take this one? Or Ed?
I'd love to.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. I saw a headline a few weeks back that said Ben Crump and the family is going to allow the Jackson County Sheriff's Office access to Nolan's phone. You know what I never heard? I never heard him follow through with that. I have reason to believe, and I do believe, that they have not cooperated with law enforcement. I do not think that they have turned in Nolan's phone. And I'm willing to bet my reputation on it. I don't think they've cooperated at all. They do not have Nolan's phone. They haven't had access to Nolan's phone. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department hasn't. So how can you say that there's text missing or there's photographs missing? Our boys had no reason to do anything with Nolan's phone other than give it back to Christine and her friends later that night. So anything about missing text messages or Snapchats is completely false.
I have reason to believe, and I do believe, that they have not cooperated with law enforcement. I don't think they've cooperated at all. They do not have Nolan's phone. According to Cox, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department has had the device the entire time, which, if true, means any claim about missing texts or wiped snapshots can't be coming from first-hand access. It would be second-hand, speculation dressed as certainty.
So after hearing that, let me bring on now the host of the Dan Abrams Show on SiriusXM POTUS Channel 124, Dan Abrams, founder of Law and Crime. Dan, good to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Jesse, great to be with you.
So the attorneys come on. Tyler Cox makes that statement, willing to bet his reputation that Ben Crump and the family haven't turned the phone over. What did you make of that?
This is the confrontation this case has been building toward for weeks. Not police versus suspect, not prosecution versus defense. It's family versus friends, grief versus self-preservation.
And, look, you do need to look at this, I think, this case from the kind of the big picture, which is, what is the evidence? And I always say this about this case when I talk about it, which is typically in these high-profile investigations, when things are bubbling up, right, and the investigation is ongoing, what makes these cases have layers is inconsistencies, is things that don't add up about what the defendants or what the witnesses, potential suspects are saying, right? And yet that hasn't been the case here, right? I mean, yeah, people are saying, well, I have questions about the call that they made for help. I have questions about why Nolan's phone was on the boat. Okay, that's great to have questions. But that's not the same thing as saying, wait a second here. This story doesn't make sense. The problem, with where we are today is their story, in my view, does kind of make sense, right?
And now attorney versus attorney playing out in real time on public radio.
I mean, I was stunned when they said it, right? I mean, when I invited them on the show, I didn't really think they were going to break news. I thought they were going to more talk about the defamation lawsuits that they were talking about, et cetera. But when he said that, I sort of paused and I was like, whoa, wait a second. He's accusing them of withholding evidence from the investigation. And sort of that's what everyone is calling for, right? Which is everyone saying, let the investigation proceed. Let's see what the investigation turns up. And you gotta hope that the family is going to be willing to turn over the phone as part of that investigation.
And here's the legal wrinkle almost nobody talked about until now. Police generally need a warrant to seize a phone from a family that doesn't want to hand it over voluntarily.
Look, you've covered cases for such a long time. I have never heard of a mutual inspection of a cell phone that could potentially be a crucial piece of evidence in this case, where their own experts and police are going to somehow simultaneously look at the phone at the same time. This is a different case, and it just made me wonder, how could they potentially refuse to turn the phone over? I mean, look, police would have to have a warrant, but at the same time, I'm trying to understand how that...
But warrants require probable cause tied to a specific target of investigation, and authorities have said repeatedly that they are not investigating Nolan's family for wrongdoing. So if the family is choosing not to cooperate, the system may have no immediate legal mechanism to force the issue. Voluntary cooperation, in other words, might be the only cooperation
How
there is.
that could even be possible.
Well, I mean, look, I would think they probably don't have to turn it over. Remember, from the police perspective, they start this by saying, we don't think there's foul play, but we're certainly going to investigate, right? They're not investigating any wrongdoing by the family of Nolan Wells. They're not investigating any wrongdoing by Nolan Wells himself. So the question of, do they get a warrant? I guess they could, but I don't know that if it's true, I don't know that the authorities really want to be at odds, right, with the family, because in theory, it is the family calling for the authorities to do a thorough investigation. And if they're not helping in that, then obviously that's a problem. Now, maybe they're going to take the position that, they don't think that the authorities are, doing a good or thorough or.
And underneath all of it sits the ugliest current running through this entire story.
Let him back on the boat. And we haven't heard that. So I just think that, and I think these lawyers are right to say, you better be really careful when you're pointing the finger at these friends. And I'm so sorry that this has become a sort of a race case. And I say, I'm so sorry because, in theory, what this is a black kid and white kids who were friends. They were really good friends, right? And suddenly the fact that they were of different races is changing people's perception of the evidence. And that is really, macro picture, that's upsetting, right? That's not where we want our society to be.
And I don't blame a family wanting all the answers.
Nolan was black. His friends on that boat were white. What should be a tragedy investigated purely on facts has, for a portion of the internet, curdled into something else entirely. With people treating friendship groups as suspects based on nothing but appearance and assumption, that's not justice. That's not accountability. That's noise dressed up as advocacy. And it actively damages the credibility of every legitimate question still sitting on the table. Questions about a wiped phone, about who exactly was on that boat, about why nobody reportedly saw an 18-year-old in distress on an island crawling with other boaters that day.
And maybe not trusting law enforcement and saying they came out too quickly to say it was not foul play and wanting to have an attorney navigate it for them. And to be honest, I whether it's the video that's come out of the boat seemingly taking on water or the audio, again, nothing to suggest to me that Nolan was on that boat. So it seems to support the narrative he was on the island. The only thing that stands out to me right now that I just can't make sense of, if this was an accident, if this was a drowning, this is an island, like you said, so many people. I don't know who law enforcement has spoken to, but no one saw him. No one saw him in distress. No, that's the part about it.
I agree.
That's the only thing I can't grasp.
I completely agree. But that also doesn't point the finger at the friends, right?
100%.
So where does this leave us? With a grand jury decision still to come, with an autopsy report still sealed, with a mother who doesn't trust the system, friends who feel like they're already being convicted online, and now a public accusation of obstruction hanging over the case with no resolution in sight. If the autopsy comes back as an accidental drowning, does this story end? Almost certainly not. Not with this much distrust baked into every side.
Overarching question I've had for weeks now. Do you think that if there are no criminal charges from the grand jury, if the autopsy from the state shows this was an accidental drowning, is that going to be the end of the story? Or do you think that people out there, maybe even the family, will not accept that?
No way it's going to be the end of the story, because as you know, Jesse, medical examiner reports are often ambiguous, right? They're often different ways to interpret it, right? So, the medical examiner really is going to assess, was it a homicide or not, right? Meaning, did he die at the hands of someone else or not? And if there is no evidence that this was a homicide in a typical investigation, that would kind of be the end of it, right? Which is, it's not a homicide. No one killed him. So time to move on. I don't think that's going to happen here, in particular because of the racial angle on this. I think Ben Crump is stating that, right? Ben Crump is saying, is lumping this case in with other cases of black late teens boys in Mississippi who he thinks the investigations have not been thorough enough. I think that this investigation is going to be as thorough as it can be. And my guess is that there's going to be a level of dissatisfaction no matter what they come up with. But look, people like you and me, we focus on facts and evidence, right? We don't get into the conspiracy theory rabbit.
And not with a phone that, according to one lawyer, has never actually made it into the hands of the people trying to solve this. The evidence is still out there. The question now is whether anyone will actually be allowed to see it. We'll be following this one as it develops. Subscribe, because when the truth comes out, you'll want to be the first to hear it.